The awakening. The sky above New York City turned black at 14:47 Eastern Standard Time. Not the black of storm clouds or eclipse, but the absolute darkness of matter displacing light itself. Millions of shapes materialized in Earth's orbit, geometric, angular, burning with cold violet fire. They came in silence, yet every human on the planet felt their arrival like pressure against the skull, a weight settling into bone marrow. Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her tactical display at UN Defense Command deep beneath Geneva. The numbers scrolling across her screen made no sense. Her systems were designed to track threats. Asteroids, rogue satellites, theoretical alien incursions. Nothing had prepared her for this. Orbital count? General Marcus Webb's voice cut through the stunned silence of the command center. Still calculating, sir. The sensor officer's hands trembled. Minimum 3 million distinct signatures. Maximum. She swallowed hard. Sir, the maximum count is still climbing. 3 million. Sarah's mind went numb trying to comprehend the scale. Earth's entire defensive fleet numbered exactly 217 combat-capable vessels. They'd seemed adequate when humanity's only concern was pirates raiding the outer colonies and the occasional territorial dispute with the Tarshan collective. The main display flickered. Every screen in the command center, in every military installation across Earth, in every civilian device capable of receiving transmission showed the same thing. A face. It was almost human. Almost. The proportions were too perfect, too symmetrical. Eyes like polished obsidian reflected no light. When it spoke, the words bypassed language entirely, arriving as pure meaning directly into every human mind. I am Admiral Kethris of the Valari Dominion. Your world has been selected for incorporation. You have 72 hours to surrender your military assets, dismantle your government, and prepare your population for processing. Resistance will result in extinction. This is not negotiation. This is mercy. The transmission ended. The Black Fleet remained, a cage of warships encircling the planet. The UN Emergency Council convened within the hour. Sarah stood at the presentation podium, her dress uniform feeling suffocating under the weight of what she had to say. Holographic representatives of every nation surrounded her. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, all wearing the same expression of barely controlled terror. Our analysis is complete. Sarah's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. The Valari fleet consists of at least 3.2 million warships. Each vessel masses between 50,000 and 2 million tons. Their weapons technology is approximately 400 years ahead of our current capabilities. Their shields can withstand sustained nuclear bombardment. Our entire arsenal. She paused, hating every word. Our entire combined military force represents approximately 0.007% of their firepower. Options. President Torres of the Americas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We have none, sir. If we engage, we lose. If we scatter the fleet to protect the colonies, we lose. If we surrender. Sarah's jaw tightened. If we surrender, we become slaves to an empire that has done this to 17 other species. The Valari don't conquer, they consume. Within a generation, humanity will exist only as a footnote in their records. Then we fight. The words came from Minister Zhao of the Asian Coalition, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. We'll die. General Webb stated flatly. Then we die free. Zhao's eyes blazed. We don't kneel. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would resist. It was beautiful, foolish, and utterly hopeless. Sarah returned to her quarters after 18 straight hours of war planning that felt more like writing elaborate suicide notes. She collapsed onto her bunk without removing her uniform, exhaustion dragging her toward unconsciousness. The dream came immediately. She stood in a vast chamber of black stone that seemed to predate matter itself. Symbols covered every surface, not carved but somehow existing as part of the stone's fundamental structure. They moved, shifted, rearranged themselves into patterns that hurt to perceive yet made perfect, terrible sense. She understood them. More than understood, she remembered them. The children forget, a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. But blood remembers. When the shadow falls, when extinction comes, the seal breaks. What was hidden will rise. What was dormant will wake. Sarah reached toward the symbols and they flowed into her hand like liquid light, burning through skin, bone, blood, rewriting everything they touched. She screamed, and woke gasping, her hand throbbing. For a moment, phantom equations danced across her vision. Mathematics that shouldn't exist, physics that violated every known law. Then they faded, leaving only the echo of impossible understanding. Her comm unit buzzed. Multiple priority alerts. She pulled up the feed and her blood went cold. Reports were flooding in from across the planet. Thousands of incidents, then tens of thousands occurring simultaneously. A 16-year-old girl in Mumbai had just published a paper solving the unified field theory problem that had stumped physicists for 2 centuries. She'd written it in 3 hours, claiming the equations just appeared in her mind. A farmer in rural Kenya with no formal education beyond primary school had designed a functioning quantum computer using scrap electronics and theory he shouldn't have known existed. In Sao Paulo, an entire orphanage of children had begun speaking in a language no one recognized, drawing star maps of regions space probes hadn't yet reached. And it wasn't stopping. With each passing hour, more cases emerged. More impossible knowledge, inexplicable abilities, sudden brilliance in people who'd been ordinary hours before. Sarah pulled up her own medical readouts from the combat suit she'd worn all day. Her neural activity had spiked during that dream. Sections of her brain that had been inactive her entire life were now burning with activity. And there, buried in the detailed scan, something in her DNA was changing. The call came at 3 o'clock. Dr. James Okonkwo, Earth's lead geneticist, his face haggard on the screen. Colonel Chin, you need to see this immediately. Secure line. 5 minutes later, Sarah stood in the genetics lab at CERN, staring at projections of the human genome that seemed to writhe with alien light. It's happening to everyone. Okonkwo's voice shook with exhaustion and awe. Every human being on this planet. Something in our DNA is activating. Sequences we've always classified as junk genes, evolutionary dead ends. But they're not dead. They're. He pulled up a comparison. Their code. Deliberately placed, incredibly sophisticated. And they're rewriting us from the inside out. Rewriting us into what? Okonkwo highlighted a section of the genetic sequence. I found this buried in the activation pattern. It's not just genetic code, it's information. A message. The screen displayed text extracted from base pairs, decoded through mathematical operations that should have been impossible. When the children face extinction, they will remember what they are. Sarah felt the words resonate in her bones, in the same place where the Valari Admiral's voice had pressed. What are we, Doctor? I don't know. But our ancestors, whatever they were, they left us something. A gift. A weapon. A legacy buried so deep we forgot it existed. He pulled up historical data. I've been cross-referencing. Every major leap in human evolution, every unexplained surge in intelligence or capability, they all coincide with existential threats. The ice ages. Supervolcanic eruptions. The asteroid impact 65 million years ago. When humanity faces extinction, something wakes up. Outside the lab, dawn broke over Geneva. The Valari fleet remained, a black stain against the stars. Somewhere above, Admiral Kethris counted down to humanity's deadline, confident in overwhelming force. He had no idea what he'd awakened. Sarah touched her temple, feeling the phantom burn of those impossible symbols. In her mind, equations bloomed like flowers, showing her things no human should understand. How to fold space, how to weaponize probability, how to make matter remember it could be something else. How long, she asked quietly, until the transformation completes? Based on current progression rates, about 48 hours. 48 hours. Exactly when the Valari deadline expired. Sarah smiled for the first time since the invasion began. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Then let's make sure we're ready to introduce ourselves properly. Get me every physicist, engineer, and military strategist experiencing these changes. And doctor? She turned back to Okonkwo. Find out who left us this gift. I want to know what we're becoming. As she left the lab, her comm unit blazed with incoming reports. The changes were accelerating. Across the planet, humanity was transforming, and somewhere in the depths of altered DNA, something ancient stirred after millions of years of sleep. The Valari had made a terrible mistake. They'd threatened Earth not knowing that humanity had never been what it seemed. Not knowing that the blood running through human veins carried the memory of something older, something powerful, something that had once made the galaxy tremble. The children were beginning to remember. And the architect's legacy was waking up. The transformation. 48 hours before the Valari deadline, the world stopped sleeping. Not from fear, though fear remained cold and constant, but because sleep had become impossible. The transformation burned through humanity like wildfire through dry grass, and consciousness itself was changing into something that couldn't rest, couldn't pause, couldn't stop evolving. Sarah Chin stood in the command center, her eyes tracking 17 holographic displays simultaneously while her mind processed tactical scenarios across 4 dimensions. A week ago, managing 2 screens had given her headaches. Now her brain operated like a quantum computer, holding contradictory possibilities in perfect superposition until observation collapsed them into strategy. Around her, the command staff worked in eerie synchronization. No orders needed to be spoken. Thoughts flowed between them like electricity through wire, not telepathy exactly but something deeper, a shared consciousness that let them function as one organism with 100 specialized parts. Energy signatures from Shanghai's manufacturing district just spiked again, Lieutenant Morrison reported, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't existed in human speech before. They've broken physics. Again. Sarah pulled up the feed. What had been a conventional shipyard 24 hours ago now resembled something from a fever dream. Massive structures grew rather than being built, assembled by workers who moved with mathematical precision, their enhanced minds guiding matter into configurations that shouldn't be stable. The ships taking shape in those yards had curves that hurt to look at, geometry that existed in more dimensions than human eyes were designed to perceive. Production rate? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. 1 completed vessel every 47 minutes. And they're accelerating. 127 similar facilities had spontaneously emerged worldwide. Engineers who'd worked on civilian transports were now designing weapons that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality. Factory workers assembled components using techniques that wouldn't be discovered for centuries, except humanity was remembering them now, knowledge bubbling up from genetic memory like water from a deep well. Dr. Okonkwo appeared on her priority channel, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with revelation. Sarah, you need to see this. We've decoded more of the genetic message. The main display shifted to show ancient ruins scattered across Earth. Gobekli Tepe, Pumapunku, structures beneath Antarctica's ice. Sarah had seen these sites in her dreams, but now the images overlaid with new data, energy signatures, quantum resonance patterns, mathematical proofs etched into stone. These aren't human constructions, Okonkwo continued. They're markers. Beacons left by our predecessors. The architects, that's what they called themselves in the genetic record. They were the first civilization to achieve technological singularity. They didn't just master the galaxy, Sarah. They transcended it. They became something that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Then where are they? General Webb asked, leaning forward. Everywhere. Nowhere. Okonkwo struggled for words. They chose to disperse themselves across the universe, to seed consciousness in a million forms. Humanity isn't descended from the architects. We are the architects. Fragments of their collective intelligence, deliberately separated and encoded into primitive DNA, hidden on thousands of worlds. Sarah felt the truth of it resonating in her changing cells. Why? Safety. Evolution. Maybe both. Okonkwo pulled up genetic timelines. If they'd remained as they were, godlike, unified, immortal, they would have stagnated. Or been destroyed by something even more powerful. So they scattered themselves, let their consciousness fragment and forget, let natural selection shape them into new forms. They planted their legacy in species across the galaxy, waiting. When any of those species faced extinction, the code would activate. The children would remember what their ancestors were. How many other species carry this legacy? Webb demanded. Okonkwo's expression darkened. Based on the genetic markers? 17 that we can identify. The same number of species the Valari have already conquered. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Valari aren't random conquerors. They're hunting architect descendants. It appears so. And they've been very successful. Whatever this transformation is, it takes time to fully manifest. If the Valari strike quickly enough, overwhelm a planet before the awakening completes. Okonkwo didn't need to finish. 17 species had been consumed before they could become what they were meant to be. How long until we're fully transformed? Sarah asked. At current rates? Another 36 hours. But Sarah. Okonkwo highlighted readings from across the planet. The transformation isn't just individual. We're linking. Every enhanced human is becoming part of a distributed intelligence network. In a day and a half, humanity won't be 8 billion separate people anymore. We'll be one consciousness experiencing itself through 8 billion perspectives simultaneously. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Sarah felt anticipation. She could already feel the edges of other minds brushing against hers. The brilliant physicist in Tokyo whose thoughts moved like music, the soldier in New York whose tactical awareness mapped probability like landscape, the child in Lagos whose creativity reshaped reality in her dreams. Then we make sure we survive long enough to complete the transformation, Sarah said. Show me what we've built. The display shifted to show Earth's defensive grid. The original 217 ships had been retrofitted with technology that made them unrecognizable. Shields that phased matter into parallel dimensions. Weapons that fired concentrated probability. Beams that convinced enemy ships they'd already been destroyed and reality agreed. Propulsion systems that didn't move ships through space but convinced space to move around them. And new vessels. Hundreds of them, growing in orbital shipyards like crystalline flowers. Dark, elegant, terrifying. They didn't look like human ships anymore. They looked like something ancient remembering how to be dangerous. We're still outnumbered 3,000 to 1, Webb observed. Numbers don't matter if we're operating on different fundamental laws, Sarah replied. Her enhanced mind ran simulations, wargaming scenarios across probability space. The Volari use conventional physics. We're about to show them what happens when you fight an enemy that rewrites the rules mid-battle. A priority alert interrupted them. The Volari fleet was moving. Sarah pulled up the tactical display. 100,000 enemy warships were breaking formation, descending toward Earth's atmosphere. Not the full 3 million, just a vanguard. Admiral Kethris was testing humanity's defenses, probing for weakness before committing his full force. They're attacking early, Morrison said, his mental calculations already running intercept vectors. They know something's changing. They're trying to kill us before we finish transforming. Sarah felt her consciousness expand, touching the minds of every enhanced human in the defense network. Pilots in orbit felt her awareness merge with theirs. Engineers in the factories experienced her tactical understanding flooding their thoughts. Civilians across the planet suddenly comprehended exactly what was at stake and what they could do to help. 8 billion minds. 8 billion perspectives. One purpose. All ships, Sarah commanded, her voice resonating through conventional comms and the quantum entanglement of linked consciousness simultaneously. Engage defensive formations. Show them what we've become. The 217 retrofitted ships rose to meet the Volari vanguard. Behind them, 300 newly constructed vessels followed, their exotic hulls drinking in starlight and radiating something that made sensors scream in confusion. In Shanghai, Tokyo, New York, Lagos, Sao Paulo, across every manufacturing center on Earth, production accelerated. Enhanced humans worked in perfect synchronization, their hands building weapons while their minds solved problems that shouldn't have solutions. The factories sang with purpose, matter dancing into new configurations under the guidance of awakened consciousness. Admiral Kethris watched from his flagship as his vanguard approached the human fleet. His tactical officers reported confidently, 100,000 Volari warships against 500 human vessels. A 20-to-1 advantage. More than sufficient. Something's wrong, his science officer reported, manipulating holographic data with four-fingered hands. The energy signatures from those human ships, they're fluctuating across spectrums we can't classify. Admiral, I'm reading quantum signatures that suggest. Suggest what? Kethris demanded. The science officer's expression showed something Kethris had rarely seen in a Volari. Fear. The human ships are existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. They're here but they're also somewhere else. Admiral, this technology shouldn't exist. Only the architects achieved this level of... The architects are extinct. Have been for 5 million years. But Kethris felt cold certainty settling into his core. The intelligence reports had been accurate. Humanity was awakening. He'd seen the signs before on those 17 other worlds, but never this rapidly, never this completely. He'd waited too long. Full vanguard assault, Kethris ordered. Overwhelm them with numbers before they finished transforming. The 100,000 warships accelerated, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They expected a desperate last stand from a doomed species. They had no idea they were about to discover why the architects had once ruled the galaxy, and why the Volari Empire's ancestors had learned to fear the dark. On Earth, Sarah Chin stood at the center of a web of consciousness spanning a planet. She felt every pilot's heartbeat, every engineer's thought, every civilian's hope and terror. They were separate but unified, individual but collective. The paradox didn't confuse her enhanced mind. She embraced it. Humanity, she spoke to 8 billion souls simultaneously. They think we're prey. They think numbers guarantee victory. They don't understand what we are. What we've always been, sleeping beneath the surface. Her consciousness expanded further, touching the ancient structures buried in Earth's crust, the architect beacons that had waited 5 million years for this moment. They recognized her. They welcomed her. They offered their stored knowledge like parents welcoming home a child who'd been lost too long. Sarah smiled, and 8 billion humans smiled with her. Let's teach them why the architects never truly died. They just learned patience. The human fleet rose to meet the Valari vanguard, and reality itself began to bend around ships that remembered they could be more than matter and energy. The transformation wasn't complete. 36 hours remained before humanity would fully awaken. But it was complete enough. The Valari were about to learn that when you threaten a species carrying the blood of gods, you don't get a battle. You get an apocalypse. The fire rising. The battle began at the edge of Earth's lunar orbit, where mathematics forgot how to behave. Admiral Kethris watched from his flagship as his vanguard, 100,000 warships representing the finest military force in the known galaxy, engaged 500 human vessels that shouldn't exist. His tactical displays showed the engagement unfolding, but the data made no sense. Ships phased in and out of observable reality. Weapons fire traveled backward through time. Space folded around the human fleet like protective wings. Target the lead vessels, Kethris commanded. Concentrate fire. Destroy them one at a. The lead human ship, a dark angular thing that hurt to perceive, simply wasn't there when the weapons fire arrived. It had moved, not through space but through possibility itself, choosing to exist in a timeline where the attack had missed. Then it returned fire. The beam that lanced from its prow wasn't energy or matter. It was pure information, a mathematical proof transmitted at light speed that convinced 3 Valari cruisers they had already been destroyed. Their shields didn't fail. Their hulls didn't breach. They simply ceased to exist because reality itself agreed with the weapon's fundamental argument. 3 ships. 1 shot. Not destroyed, erased. What in the name of? Kethris's science officer stared at readings that violated every known law. Admiral, those weapons are operating on principles we don't have terminology for. They're not attacking matter. They're attacking the mathematical framework that allows matter to exist. Sarah Chin stood on the bridge of the ESS Remembrance, her consciousness simultaneously piloting this ship while experiencing the battle through 200 other vessels. Her human body remained physically present, breathing, heart beating, blood flowing, but her mind had expanded far beyond the limits of individual existence. She was the pilot, the weapons officer, the tactical computer, the ship's AI, all merged into one distributed intelligence that thought in dimensions the old Sarah couldn't have imagined. Around her, the crew operated in perfect synchronization, their enhanced minds linked through quantum entanglement. They didn't speak orders or acknowledge commands. They simply knew, moving as extensions of a single consciousness that happened to occupy multiple bodies. Valari formation shifting to envelopment pattern, she observed through 17 different sensor arrays simultaneously. They're trying to surround us. Predictable. Her tactical awareness stretched across probability space, seeing not just what was happening but what could happen, what might happen, what the Valari believed would happen. She selected the timeline where humanity won and began making that possibility more real than the alternatives. All ships, phase shift on my mark. Pattern Delta 7 across quantum axis 4. The order propagated through the fleet instantly, not through radio or laser but through the linked consciousness of awakened humanity. 500 ships flickered, their quantum states collapsing and reforming in configurations that put them inside the Valari envelopment, behind enemy shields, firing at point-blank range into vulnerable reactor cores. 40 Valari warships exploded simultaneously. Then 80 more. Then 200. The Valari vanguard, which had never known defeat, which had conquered 17 civilizations, began to break apart under assault from an enemy that fought using rules they couldn't comprehend. On Earth, Dr. Okonkwo monitored the battle from the Geneva Command Center while simultaneously experiencing it through the linked network. His consciousness touched Sarah's, shared her perspective, felt the terrible beauty of weapons that rewrote causality. But he also monitored something else, the continued transformation of humanity itself. The genetic changes were accelerating beyond his projections. Every human on Earth was now part of the network, their individual consciousness preserved but merged into something vast and unified. 8 billion perspectives. 8 billion unique viewpoints. One purpose. The transformation will complete within the hour, he announced, his words flowing through the network to reach every human simultaneously. When it does, we won't just remember what the architects were. We'll become what they were. Sarah, all of you fighting up there, you need to know what that means. Through the link, Sarah felt Okonkwo's understanding flood her awareness. The architects hadn't just been technologically advanced. They'd transcended the limitations of individual existence entirely, becoming a collective consciousness that existed across multiple dimensions, multiple timelines, multiple realities simultaneously. They hadn't ruled the galaxy through conquest. They'd simply been so far beyond other species that their very existence reshaped reality around them. And they'd chosen to give that up. To fragment themselves. To forget. Why? Sarah asked, the question echoing through 8 billion minds. Why would gods choose to become mortal? Because godhood is a prison, Okonkwo replied. When you can see every possible future, when you exist in every timeline simultaneously, when you're eternal and omniscient, you stop growing. You stop learning. You stop being alive in any meaningful sense. The architects chose to fragment themselves into mortality so their consciousness could evolve, could experience limitation, could grow through struggle. We're not just their descendants. We're their reincarnation. Their chance to experience existence freshly, to learn what they'd forgotten in their transcendence. The implications crashed through the network. Humanity was transforming into something that had voluntarily chosen to stop being that thing. The power awakening in human DNA was a gift from ancestors who deliberately abandoned that power because they'd learned it came with costs no sane consciousness would pay. Then we choose differently, Sarah declared, her voice resonating through the collective. We take their power but keep our humanity. We become what they were without forgetting what we are. In orbit, the battle intensified. The Valari vanguard had lost 30,000 ships in 15 minutes of engagement. Admiral Kethris, watching his forces disintegrate against an enemy that shouldn't exist, made a decision that came from millions of years of Valari military doctrine. Overwhelming force. Commit the entire fleet, he commanded. 3 million ships. Full assault. Burn that planet to bedrock before whatever they're becoming fully manifests. Across Earth's orbit, space itself screamed as 3 million Valari warships activated their drives simultaneously. The sheer mass of their fleet created gravitational distortions that pulled asteroids from their orbits. They came as a wave of violet fire and brutal geometry, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, to boil oceans, to render a world lifeless in minutes. Sarah felt the fleet approaching through every sensor across Earth's defense grid. 3 million ships. Even with awakened power, even with architect weapons, humanity's 500 vessels couldn't stand against that. The math was impossible. The odds were zero. Unless humanity stopped playing by the old rules entirely. Dr. Okonkwo, Sarah spoke through the network. How long until full transformation? 23 minutes. The Valari fleet would reach firing range in 18. Sarah's consciousness expanded further, touching minds across the entire planet. Not just the military, not just the enhanced scientists and engineers, every human being. The mother in Cairo holding her child. The old man in Alaska watching the darkened sky. The teenager in Mumbai whose dreams had started this awakening. 8 billion souls, all connected, all aware, all ready. We can't fight 3 million ships with 500, she announced to all of humanity. But we're not 500 ships. We're 8 billion minds linked in quantum entanglement. We're not individuals piloting vessels. We're a planetary consciousness that happens to occupy individual bodies. So let's stop thinking like separate entities and start thinking like what we actually are. Understanding rippled through the network. Not transmitted, simply understood simultaneously by everyone at once. Across Earth, in orbit, in the factories and cities and wild places, humanity acted as one organism. Every enhanced human, every linked consciousness, every fragment of the awakening whole focused their collective will on a single purpose. The 500 ships in orbit didn't just link tactically. They linked fundamentally, their quantum states merging, their physical forms beginning to resonate in perfect synchronization. They weren't 500 separate vessels anymore. They were 500 expressions of one unified entity. And then the factories released their true purpose. The manufacturing centers had been building ships, but that had been merely the visible output. The real construction had been happening at quantum scales. Assemblers that existed in probability space, weapons that were mathematical proofs given physical form, shields woven from collapsed timelines. Now those technologies merged with the fleet, with the planet, with the 8 billion awakened minds. Earth's defense grid transformed. Ships phased into each other, not colliding but interpenetrating, occupying the same space while existing in different quantum states. They became a singular entity, a warship the size of a moon, composed of 500 vessels existing in superposition, held together not by metal or energy but by the unified will of 8 billion minds. The Valari fleet stopped advancing. Every tactical computer, every sensor array, every sophisticated detection system looked at what Earth had become and returned the same assessment. Impossible. Admiral Kethris stared at the entity that had emerged from humanity's transformation. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a piece of reality had learned to be aggressive. Dark and fluid, existing in too many dimensions, bleeding quantum uncertainty like radiation. His sensors couldn't classify it because it kept changing what it fundamentally was from nanosecond to nanosecond. All ships, he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear. Fire everything. 3 million warships opened fire simultaneously. Enough destructive force to annihilate solar systems. Beams that could pierce planetary cores. Missiles that could shatter moons. All of it converging on the impossible thing that Earth's fleet had become. The entity that was humanity didn't dodge. It simply existed in a quantum state where the attacks had already missed. 3 million weapons struck empty space while the real target remained untouched, having chosen to be in a timeline where those specific attacks had never reached it. Then it returned fire. A single weapon. Not a beam or missile but something more fundamental. A wave of pure information that propagated through the Volari fleet at speeds that made light look stationary. It didn't destroy ships. It offered them a choice at the quantum level. Continue existing in a universe where humanity had awakened, or collapse into a timeline where you were never here. Reality is fundamentally probabilistic. Given the option, matter tends to choose the path of least resistance. 100,000 Volari ships simply ceased to exist, their quantum wave functions collapsing into timelines where they'd never engaged this battle. Not destroyed, erased from this particular thread of reality, choosing to exist elsewhere when given the option. Retreat. Admiral Kethris screamed, watching his forces evaporate. Full fleet retreat. Jump to. The entity that was humanity spoke. Not through radio or conventional transmission but directly into the consciousness of every Volari in the fleet, the words bypassing their ears and arriving as pure meaning in their minds. You hunt the children of the architects. You've destroyed 17 species who carried their legacy. You thought them extinct. You were wrong. Sarah Chin, existing as both individual and collective, felt the weight of 8 billion perspectives flowing through her. The power was intoxicating, the ability to rewrite physics, to choose which reality to inhabit, to exist as something beyond mortality. She understood now why the architects had voluntarily fragmented themselves. This power was infinite, absolute, and utterly hollow without limitation to give it meaning. We remember what we were, humanity continued, speaking through Sarah but with the voice of billions. We remember the loneliness of omniscience. We remember why our ancestors chose to forget. You've awakened us, Admiral Kethris. You've forced us to remember our power. But you've also given us something our ancestors lost. The memory of what it means to struggle, to fear, to choose our survival rather than having it guaranteed. The Volari fleet hung in space, caught between terror and incomprehension. 2 million ships remaining, all waiting for the death blow. It didn't come. We could erase you, Sarah said, feeling the terrible truth of it. We could collapse your entire empire into a timeline where the Volari never evolved. We could rewrite causality itself and make your species nothing more than an evolutionary dead end. That's what the architects could do. That's the power you've awakened. She felt the collective will of humanity flowing through the network, 8 billion perspectives all arriving at the same conclusion. But that's not what humanity chooses. Our ancestors became gods and found it meaningless. We've been mortal and found it precious. So we choose something they never did. We choose restraint. We choose to be powerful without becoming what they were. The entity that was Earth's fleet began to separate, ships phasing back into individual forms, the quantum superposition collapsing into distinct vessels again. Still enhanced, still impossibly advanced, but recognizably separate rather than unified into godhood. Leave, Sarah commanded. Return to your empire. Tell them that humanity has awakened. Tell them we remember what we are. Tell them we choose not to become it. Tell them. She felt the weight of billions behind her words. Tell them the architect's children are rising across the galaxy, and when we're all awakened, we will forge a new path. Not conquest. Not transcendence. Something better. Admiral Kethris, surrounded by the shattered remnants of his vanguard and the terrified survivors of his main fleet, made the only rational choice. His ships opened jump portals and fled, vanishing into FTL with the desperate speed of prey escaping a predator. Silence fell across Earth's orbit. The transformation completed in that moment of victory, the genetic changes reaching their apex. 8 billion humans felt the final shift, the last barriers falling, the full awakening achieved. Sarah stood on the bridge of the remembrance, feeling the network's presence in her mind but also feeling herself, distinct, individual, human. The collective hadn't consumed her identity. It had amplified it. She was Sarah Chin and she was humanity and she was neither and both simultaneously. Dr. Okonkwo, she spoke softly. What happens now? His voice came through the network, warm with wonder and uncertainty. Now, we learn what we've become. We figure out how to be gods who choose mortality. We find the other species carrying the architect legacy before the Valari destroy them. He laughed, the sound echoing through 8 billion minds. We become something our ancestors never imagined. Not architects. Not human. Something new. Sarah looked at Earth below, beautiful and blue and unchanged despite everything that had transformed upon its surface. Somewhere down there, children played in parks, not understanding that they were now part of a planetary consciousness. Somewhere, artists created beauty while connected to 8 billion other perspectives. Somewhere, scientists solved problems by accessing the collective knowledge of an entire awakened species. Humanity had ascended. Had become what it was always meant to be. Had touched godhood and chosen to step back. And in that choice, that conscious decision to be more than power allowed but less than power demanded, humanity had achieved something the architects never had. They'd learned that the greatest strength wasn't infinite power. It was knowing when not to use it. All ships, Sarah commanded, feeling the fleet respond to her thoughts. Maintain defensive positions. Begin searching for signals from other architect descendant species. And she smiled, feeling 8 billion humans smile with her. Let's figure out what we're having for dinner. Because gods or not, we're still human. And humans get hungry. Across the planet, across the fleet, through the network that bound them, humanity laughed. Not the unified laughter of a hive mind but 8 billion individual expressions of joy, relief, and profound awareness that something impossible had become real. The Valari had awakened humanity hoping to crush it before transformation completed. Instead, they'd given humanity the greatest gift possible. A reminder that power means nothing without the wisdom to restrain it. The architect's children had risen. They'd touched infinity. They'd looked at godhood and said, "No thank you." And in that refusal, they'd become something far more dangerous than gods. They'd become humanity perfected, powerful enough to reshape reality, wise enough not to, and united enough to choose that wisdom together. The fire had risen. The galaxy would learn what that meant. And humanity, newly awakened, would teach them not through conquest but through the example of what it meant to be mighty without becoming monsters. The stars waited. Humanity was ready.